So today is September 11th, 9/11, and we remember the events of September 11th in the year 2001 when large airliners were weaponized, and this is the world we live in. So we'll just pause for a moment of silence to honor the fallen and those who sacrificed after 9/11. So please stand by. Okay, today what we'll do is complete our review of the Chapter 2 material. We're going to focus on the 12 vulnerabilities, and then we'll spend some time highlighting some measures you can take with your solution. So as you turned in your solution, there were some results that you'll submit, and there are some quick adjustments that you can take to supplement some additional material, and then resubmit your solution for even more points. So based on what we share today, I'll be having individual, I'll be sharing individual details with each of you about the measures you can consider, the things that we'll show and share today. So after today, what we'll do is wrap things up, and then we'll put the Module 1 assessment online, and you'll have until 1 p.m. Wednesday to complete your first attempt at the Module 1 assessment. Can everybody see the screen?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay. All right, that's great. So we're going to move pretty quickly here, but basically your textbook author chooses to organize the different kinds of threats that can afflict specific exposures to data and systems. And basically, yes. So we're just going to highlight some quick things about each one, but essentially compromises to intellectual property. This is at the top of the list. And one of the things that started the whole hacking and cybersecurity phenomenon was the idea that we had digital music and digital movies and software, and that we could pirate or copy the applications, the operating systems, right? You could steal a copy of Windows, or you could steal a copy of Office, or you could steal a copy of a movie after you digitized it. And this is one of the things that started a whole series of really interesting developments in the industry, and it's part of the cybersecurity legacy. There is a law called the Millennium Copyright something or other. We'll get into that in more details, but basically the recording industry stepped in and advocated a series of laws where if people were copying music in particular, there was an application called Napster about 20 years ago. People used to bootleg music in particular. There were rampant cases of piracy, but then the recording industry did something unprecedented and sneaky and evil. They got together behind closed doors, and some of the most powerful members of the recording industry embedded rootkits in the audio CDs so that when people put them in their computers to rip the copies of music, they would infect their computers with a rootkit, and their privacy was violated, right? And in some cases, when people were taking audio CDs to get a digital copy, if they weren't passing that off to the internet and giving it away freely, and they were just using it for their own purposes, that was well within the bounds of the copyright. So the recording industry was guilty of infecting worldwide, many hundreds of thousands of systems, and they got caught. So this is one of those things that's a really fascinating side trip. In any case, the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, I think, is the DMCA is the name of this thing. Deviations in quality of service. This is one we're familiar with, the availability issue. So the very reason that we decided to make some changes to the first solution we'd engage to address network availability in your own home speaks to this, this very threat. It's, you know, can't use digital resources and data if they're not available to you. Espionage is probably the single highest and most common case of malicious activity, skilled activity. If a competitor can get inside the fort of a competitor on the network and then steal the digital assets and Kool-Aid, so to speak, then they can have a competitive advantage. And a lot of the very highly motivated sort of mission impossible scenarios that you hear about, that's the most common malicious intentional threat. Forces of nature, this would have to do with availability again. When you have fire, floods, earthquakes, and lightning, you have destruction of data centers. The more that people put in the cloud, the more that this interest is a concern. Because if you put all your stuff in the cloud and then the data center is wiped out with a massive earthquake, if you don't have good backups, then that can be a problem. Human error or failure. Employee mistakes, either people don't know or they intentionally do things. Information extortion, so if you learn the dirty little secrets of someone you care to manipulate, some of the malicious things that are happening, there's a particular ransomware package that pops up on the screen and it says, we've seen you surfing porn. Unless you submit Bitcoin, we're gonna share screen images from your webcam and the windows you were watching, and it's a pretty powerful hoax, and in some cases it's not even a hoax. So extortion is one of the threats to information systems and data. Of course, sabotage and vandalism, right? People just being malicious to destroy. That's where you think of the anonymous hacker collectives going in there and wiping out all banking records so that everybody's equal again, right? So this is one of the broader dreams of these anarchists. Software attacks, so you have websites where you can get free software, except it's a software that with a little extra. So you have some hackers that embed malware inside software, or you have poorly written software where a hacker knows how to exploit poorly written software. Technical hardware failures, you can have simple things that cause issues. One that comes to mind is that there was some sort of power saving mechanism and poor hardware design for lithium batteries and a certain brand of cell phone, and there were 1 million recalls, literally 1 million phones that were recalled because they were exploding and maiming people or killing them in some cases. This happened about 10 years ago. And it was basically a tainted supply chain. Technical software failures or errors, you just have bugs, you have things that crash and they're not supposed to crash, so you have unreliable systems or you have corrupt data. Technological obsolescence. Now this is a big one I like to spend a little bit of time talking about. There are many people in the world that want to get as much bang for the buck when they purchase technology, and it has to do with their accounting sensibilities. Their finance consultants tell them that they have to get a return on the investment. So they have this cycle where they depreciate each year how much a purchase for technology is, a server, a network firewall, and so on. The problem with that approach is if you wait 5 to 7 years to replace a firewall, there are many cases where if you wait too long to replace a firewall, it's no longer effective against blocking hackers. So technological obsolescence is actually a pretty serious thing. And then of course, theft. If somebody has physical possession of your tech, I don't care what kind of tech it is, they can get into it, they can access it, they can get into your secrets, or they can corrupt your data. In some cases, they want to lay hold of it just for a short time so that they can modify the thing, or they want to steal it outright so they can have access to sensitive information. Identity theft is one of the fastest growing threats. So that's a quick recap of what you see here. And what I'd like to do then is just flip through some of the remaining slides. So you can capture some other aspects of the 12 threats. And yes, you can expect that a good number of these are going to be on the assessment. So moving right along. Yeah, this is more information about intellectual property. It says the most common IP breaches involve software piracy, software and information business software alliance. These are organizations that came together to try to combat this. Sometimes you have to have a key or a dongle. It's a little USB you plug in order for the software to run. So there are little things that companies have devised to try to take care of that. Quality of service. So the service level agreement, this is one thing that most people could do to improve their internet. I'm going to tell you this right now. In fact, I'm going to add this to the addendum for our, I'm going to provide an addendum to the study guide. And I'm going to tell you that you should always use or exploit, you should always press your consumer rights through the SLA, your provider, requires. So when you get service from the internet service provider, they have all this fancy fine print. Have you ever seen this? Get a smartphone, or you get internet service, and there's all this fine print. You have to accept it. There's something called a service level agreement. And that service level agreement, basically, what it means is that if your internet is down for so many hours in a month, then you get half of your bill off. The thing is, you have to call them. And what you don't know is that that's a nuisance to them. You log a ticket, you say, my internet service was down for a day. I'm entitled to a refund on my contract. And so I need a credit on my bill. And what they'll say is well, okay, we'll log this under this ticket number, but we won't post it this month, it'll post next month, right? And what you do is you keep up with that. Now, what's the effect if you lose internet and you lose internet and you lose internet, and you've done everything you're supposed to do, you've checked your connections inside, you have a UPS, you have a battery backup, right? You're not supposed to lose internet, but it's a service that's always out for them. I guarantee you that if you do this 2 or 3 times, they'll send a technician out, they'll figure out what's wrong with your gear, and they'll fix it. And you'll have radically improved service. But most people don't realize that in order to fight the quality of service problem, it's actually a consumer issue, and you press your rights as a consumer, right? So they don't expect people to do that. All that fine print actually works to your advantage if you use it. So that's one thing I would advocate in order to get better stuff, right? So when there's downtime, when your internet isn't working, you know you're not productive. This is the cost of what happens. And ideally, in businesses, the gold standard for downtime is supposed to be something called the 5 nines. So your internet service is supposed to be up 99.999% of the time. your network, your PCs, and your internet are all supposed to be functioning 99.999% of the time. And this is the ideal gold standard for proper technology infrastructure. In our neighborhood, it's more like, I'd be surprised if it was 99, just plain 99% instead of 99.999. It amounts to, and here's what you see, the cost, if it's 99.5%, was estimated to be $9,315,432 dollars in terms of lost productivity. So when people can't work, you lose money. Basically what it boils down to. Any questions about 5 nines? I'm going to make a note of 5 nines on the addendum. So that equates to less than an hour each year. So in an entire year, your organization only experiences a few minutes, less than an hour of downtime the entire year. That's the standard for corporate America, right? Think about what happens if Amazon quits working for an hour. People can't buy stuff for an hour. That really adds up fast. Of course, we talked about power, having backups, battery backups, sensitive electronic equipment. Some of your battery backups have noise filters. You can buy noise filters, and that helps your network work more reliably. So a short-term decrease in electrical power availability is known as a what? Surge, spike, sag, or swell? A sag. It's also known as a brownout. More electronics are damaged from low voltage, a decrease in power, right? A sag, right? So espionage, it's mostly for competitive intelligence purposes. Shoulder surfing. So we've mentioned this before, haven't we? So if somebody wants to blackmail you, if they want to get into your Kool-Aid, this is a really common practice. Here you are clicking along and they're watching. But remember, nowadays with a smartphone, you can look like you're doing something very innocent on your smartphone while you're actually recording something and they're clicking into that. So trespassing. They make the distinction between expert hackers and unskilled hackers. If you get scripts off of GitHub and you modify a script to hack something, you're considered to be a script kiddie. I don't know if you've ever heard that term before. Or packet monkeys. You're basically trying to hack into something with the network. You don't really understand it completely. Most hackers are pretty limited in terms of their skills, unless they're part of a larger organization or they're a hacker for hire. Espionage or trespass, right? So in most cases, it has to do with a competitive advantage. The term cracks, that has to do with being able to remove any protection against duplication. Phreaking is when you use the phone system to get in there. If you take a phone system and you dial certain codes, you can break into the phone system, get free long distance calls. Back in the day, that was a big thing. It's not so common anymore. Password attacks, rainbow tables. So this is a really cool thing. They pre-calculate the hash of the password. They store it in a table. And then they get a hold of your hash, and all they do is look it up. And they can basically have your password that way. Everybody's heard of password cracking, right? Where you use different combinations. So brute force is when you just try 6, if you know it's a 6-character password, you try all the combinations of 6 characters. If you use a dictionary attack, you're looking up specific words about that individual. So if somebody does some Facebook checks and they know you like cats and your favorite cat's name is so-and-so, they can feed those words into a dictionary, and this software will basically auto-generate a variety of passwords based on the name of your cat. It's pretty cool stuff. The other thing to do is social engineering. Somebody poses as an imposter and they say, hey, I'm calling for the bank, or I'm calling for the tech support. I need to check something on your system. Can you read me these things, right? And they ask you to look up some stuff and read. So this is an interesting graphic here. If you have a 16-character password, it takes, if you use cracking tools, even the best cracking tools now, I want you to understand this, even with the best cracking tools available, it takes over 2,000 years to crack a 16-character password. Unless, of course, people just can't remember all 16 characters, they write it down on a sticky note and they put it underneath their keyboard and you just take a picture of it, right? So that's the other dynamic about security that we always have to watch. So case sensitive, right? So when you get case sensitive, use special characters. In this scenario, you didn't have to use numbers or special characters, and it still took over 2,000 years. When you add numbers and special characters to a 16-character password, it takes 226,332,000,000 years to crack. Unless, of course, you have a supercomputer, in which case it doesn't take very long at all. We're not going to spend a lot of time on forces of nature. We live with that here in the Virgin Islands, and you're very familiar with all of that. But basically, protecting data and services, you have to be prepared. It's the human error that's actually the most interesting. Sometimes people just don't know better and they do things, they install software that wipes their computer out. And if they don't know how to do the software correctly, that's a matter of inexperience, right? They just haven't had exposure to that kind of thing. Employees are among the greatest threats to an organization's data. I'm going to say that again because you might see that like on your module assessment, right? Employees are among the greatest threat to organizations' data. Either they're disgruntled employees or they're poorly trained employees, poorly disciplined employees. How many of you know that if you have a Xerox machine in an organization, you can recall the copies that were made on the Xerox machine, and then you have copies of everything that people photocopied, right? That's pretty interesting stuff. But then in order to get in there to lay hold of it, you might pose as a photocopy repairman. And unless somebody knows they didn't call for you. Oh, I'm just here to do routine maintenance. So you pull the panel, you do some things, you connect some cables, and there it is. You have a copy of everything they've done, right? That gets into social engineering. Another word for this is skillcraft. This gets into spy stuff. So if you've seen movies where people are doing sneaky technology things, that has to do with social engineering. Training and ongoing awareness is really important. If somebody isn't where they're supposed to be and they're in the ceiling and they're doing something with the network cables, you should check to see if the maintenance crew is aware that somebody is in the ceiling doing something with the network cables. I'm absolutely serious. So that happens all the time. People are the weakest link, right? So instead of using long passwords, we use biometric devices. We'll spend plenty of this time on this, but Kevin Mitnick is a convicted felon. He's a hacker who was basically very successful, and then the FBI got involved and they tracked him down and they caught him, and now he's a cybersecurity consultant. And Kevin Mitnick quoted, "People are the weakest link. You can have the best technology, firewalls, intrusion detection systems, biometric devices, and somebody can call an unsuspecting employee. That's all she wrote, baby. They got everything. So they'll call somebody up, they'll mention something in passing, and before you know it, they're on a computer system and you think they're a member of the IT shop and they aren't. Okay, how many of us know all of the IT staff here at the university and know them by face? And they always wear their name badges, right? Right? No? Okay. Of course, email compromise is huge. Over 90% of all exploits come from either email or web. So this is where the user needs more education and training and awareness. If you interact with a link on an email, let's see if we can find something here. If you hold your pointer over a link, it should match what's on the description, right? So if it's for bankofamerica.com and you hold your mouse over it and it shows something, something, something .cz, that's Chinese, right? So that's a great way to get things. Phishing is incredibly effective. In fact, there are contests to see how many people they can trick. So one of the realities of phishing attacks and web exploits is that all you have to do is go to a website, right? Let's go to a basic website here. Let's go to a basic website. Let's go to Amazon. How's that? Oh, come on. Taking too long. Well, let's do the University of Virgin Islands. Anybody know what how you capture the source code for this website? Anybody know
I know it's a hotkey. I just don't know which hotkey it is. I think it's control.
Yeah, it's a hotkey sequence. And basically, if you're on a website, let's go to Google. And I'm just gonna say otters. All right, so let's go to an otter website. Let's go to like a Wikipedia article about otters, right? So if I go to this and I can basically capture, view the page source. All I did was right click that. Everybody see this?
Yeah.
So all I have to do is download the images and capture this. I can set up my own web server. I can do things behind the screen and then pass that traffic on to the real web server. And nobody knows that I'm in the mix. So now I'm capturing everything that people are doing and interacting with that website. So if I view the page source, there it is. I can copy and paste this into my own text editor and I can tweak it. And then I can basically weaponize the links. So when people click on that, and they're not going to Bank of America, they're going on a website that looks just like Bank of America and they're entering their login and their password. So pretty serious stuff. Nigerian fraud letter. The email version of this is legendary. Oh, lovely citizen of the United States, I am writing you to inform you that you know, your dreams have been answered. And all I need is a little bit of help, and you can make lots of money. And these are incredibly compelling. Now, the reason they do this is because in a pool of 1,000 people, there are still 2 or 3 people that actually respond to this. So you probably wonder, why is this still around? Why haven't they shut this down? Because it's still successful. P.T. Barnum was a famous person who started the Barnum, and he was one of the 2 leads that started the Barnum and Bailey Circus that traveled all over the Western Hemisphere. They would pull up the tents and they'd set up a circus. I mean, literally a circus, right? With elephants and clowns and all that kind of stuff. And P.T. Barnum, one of the partners, said there's a sucker born every minute. So, you know, if you had a bearded lady and, you know, a sword swallower, basically these were illusions. Well, in some cases, people can actually swallow swords, but bearded ladies and so on, right? 2-headed people. There are all sorts of ways from a distance to kind of trick people into what you're seeing, and they're willing to pay the price of admission. So his famous saying was, there's a sucker born every minute. And this is the modern day example, right? So here it says, RegionsNet, yeah, online banking, you click the link, only you're not going to the link. Or, yeah, so this is a perfect example of a fake website, and it's all too easy to do. Cyber extortion. So if you get into somebody's digital information and you're that brash, there are some very confident hackers out there that like to embarrass people, and but a lot of it's not that sophisticated. They just want to get in there so they can get a hold of your credit card number and then buy things. Ransomware. I'm going to say this once. No, I'm going to say this several times, but I'll say it today. True or false, if you store your stuff in the cloud, you're protected against ransomware. Yes or no?
No.
You are not. That is the correct answer. If where you store your documents is tied and it's live and it's open to the cloud, when you're infected with ransomware, it jumps into the cloud and it scrambles your stuff in the cloud. Okay? So cloud stuff doesn't back up your data and it doesn't protect you against ransomware. And so basically they hook people into clicking on a link they shouldn't have, and then all their data is encrypted. The single most important thing you can do to protect yourself against ransomware is to capture the things that matter to you most on your systems and your devices and make a backup of them. Set a calendar appointment and say, you know what, I got a lot of stuff on my phone, you know, family weddings, funerals, births, all kinds of things. And they're irreplaceable. And I don't want to have to pay a ransomware for it. So I'm going to get a backup of this. And then when the ransomware hits, I laugh. That's the single most important thing you can do. This is typical. So there are some very convincing ransomware screens. Ransomware has crippled agencies in our territory. So there have been cases where ransomware has encrypted some of the data in our territorial government agencies. They won't tell you about it, and they don't want to. That's the other part of it. It's, oh, if you don't pay, if you don't pay by a certain time, it's going to be obvious that, you know, you can't work your, oh, we're having problems with our computer system. And then you, after a point, everybody knows the gig's up. So sabotage or vandalism, that has to do with industrial espionage again. Money is the biggest motivator. Most of this is economic. A zero-day attack. I want to take a moment to explain this. Zero-day attack is when you have some malware that hits and the antivirus, there's no signature for it. There's no, you know, there's no way to counteract it, and nobody has any defense against it. That's what we mean by a zero-day attack. So antivirus and anti-malware companies are always trying to update their signatures so that they can recognize nasty malware, but there are times where you just can't. So a zero-day attack is a real thing. Backdoors. So in one of the classes, we saw that there was a port that was open and it had to do with back orifice. Was that in this class? We saw something that had to do with the NetStat result. Back orifice. Does that ring a bell? Yes, no, maybe. Can everyone see my screen?
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you get a GRC result like this, you should make sure that I see it. And if I don't respond pretty promptly to a screen like this, you should call my office, or you should text my cell phone and say, hey, Professor Kenzop, I have something I need you to look at. A remote access Trojan the initials for that are RAT or RAT. A Trojan is often a software application that you download and install, and you think it's one thing, but once it gets on your system, it's something else altogether. If its purpose is to open up ports so that people can come and visit and set up camp, that's a remote access Trojan or RAT. And there are other names and there are names that have to do with this. So one of the famous ones is back office. So you have office applications, and on the server, they call that the back office, right? So you have Microsoft Access as a database application where you can create really cool workflow apps. And then on the back end, you have SQL Server. So that's the back office, right? Well, this hacker group came up with a remote access tool called Back Orifice, and it's much like this. It's basically a remote access Trojan, and people are getting really cool software, and what they're really getting is something else entirely. That's a Trojan when it's mimicking or impersonating something worthwhile. And then when it sets up all these different ports, all the blue that you see, if you find out what's going on and you try to stop it, or you set up a firewall rule, it just uses the other ports to keep coming back and keep coming back and keep coming back. That's typically what creates this kind of pattern, okay? In fact, if you see the diagonal line, it's pretty symmetrical. It's got a distinct pattern to it. It could be a script that opens network ports every so many network ports, right? So a script that opens every 12th numbered. I'm going to open up port 25, port 37, port 49. I'm just going to keep adding 12 to that number. That's what will create a pattern like this. Okay. I think these are posted in the, you can have a look at the rest of the stuff yourself. What I'd like to do is basically go over the things that you can do based on the results. So inside your network connection, how many of you were aware that there's a setting on your network interfaces? It's called the magic packet. You can wake up a device or a system remotely. If you go into here, and I'm going to go into this screen, and then I'm going to go to change the adapter settings, and I'll go to the Ethernet. All right, so first of all, does everyone see IPv6? You should turn that off. In your home environment, if you've captured this these screens for your solution, and I see that IPv6 is turned on, disable it, uncheck it, and then hit OK. And then go back into here, into properties. And under configure here, if you click, so you have to click OK and then come back. Go into configure, everybody see power management?
Yeah.
All right, you see this option right here? Allow this device to wake the computer. Hackers love to turn that on. And you shouldn't, unless you want somebody to remotely turn on your computer system, I would strongly advise you to go in there and uncheck all these boxes under the power management tab. That way, nobody can take advantage of power safe features to gain access to your computer. Okay? Plus, you want to talk about reliability challenges. Some power management, if you enable that, it'll disable or power down the network interface. So you leave your laptop for a minute, it's downloading something, it detects that it doesn't seem to be, you don't seem to be doing anything on your laptop. You left your laptop running. And as soon as that kicks in, you won't have that ability. You should always disable NetBIOS over TCP/IP. So here, if you go into properties and you open up TCP/IP and you go into the advanced settings under WinS, disable NetBIOS over TCP/IP should be set. The default setting, turns that on. So if you want better security and you want hackers to be incapable of browsing your network, you should change the default to disable the NetBIOS over TCP/IP. Now I'm going to go ahead and leave the default setting on there. And I want to show you something in here. Everybody uses File Explorer, right? How many of you know that at the bottom of File Explorer is an option called Network? And if you click on Network, I can see things that are connected on my network. And if they're systems, if NetBIOS is enabled, you'll start to see machines in there. And I want you to notice the network scan is going to render some other things. So in the immediate neighborhood, I have Xerox machines. And that's an attractive nuisance because people do stuff with Xerox machines all the time. They scan things and then email scans to themselves and so on. But if NetBIOS is enabled, somebody can simply click on network and they can start seeing who's on your network. Just like these printers here. So that's one thing that you should do to protect your home environment. Use local DNS whenever possible. I'm going to provide some systems for you to use so that you have your own DNS. And we'll talk about that in our next module. Here's a good one. Your Wi-Fi routers, you should load the latest firmware, right? And then you should customize the settings. Always configure the guest Wi-Fi, but change the access to these, because the default access, how many of you know that you can just look up your Wi-Fi router? What's the default password? If you're in someone's home, you know the model and brand of their router, you can basically hack their Wi-Fi router. You can look up the brand and model and then go right to, you just open a browser. And when you're opening the browser window, if you go to 192.168.1.1 and then hit enter, in most Wi-Fi environments, it'll give you a login prompt. And if you know the brand and model of that Wi-Fi router, if you haven't changed the default passwords, then basically somebody can look up your password. They can also do it from the outside if you don't disable outside access. So these are things that slow your Wi-Fi down or disrupt your Wi-Fi. If you have uninvited guests using your network resources, and it happens with freakish regularity, that can be a part of the problem. Secure access to the router by changing the password, enabling secure web access when you configure it, and use an alternate DNS. You can also use quality of service or network priorities on that router. And if you do network gaming, you should use the DMZ feature. So this concludes our review of some additional measures you can take. When I see your results for the solution, I'll specifically recommend some things. If you don't know where to go or how to set them up, you and I can share a screen and I'll help you. Okay? Does anyone have, based on the information we've shared, does anyone have any observations or comments before we close out today?
Yeah, I have a question about the ransomware.
About what?
Ransomware. Can it be removed?
Ransomware. Yeah. That's a great question. And yes, it can be removed. There are some tools to remove some types of ransomware, but what usually happens is that the software companies, the antivirus companies, are always playing catch up. So as long as you have a backup of your data, you can wipe your system clean and get rid of the ransomware and then use your system all over again. And if you lock it down after you rebuild it, they can't get back on there. So you can recover effectively, but the key is to get an extra backup of the files that matter to you. Get a thumb drive, get an external hard disk, and get those, get extra copies of those before the ransomware hits. And then you can wipe it clean and reset your system. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, yes, thanks.
Yeah, in some cases, the tools will remove it. Now, there are really bad people out there that have all sorts of ransomware removal tools. and they're hackers themselves, and then they get on there and then they tell you, well, if you pay me this, then I'll load this software on there and then I'll help you. And they're actually victimizing you even further. So when it comes to searching for a specific ransomware tool, sometimes the people that build the ransomware put the removal tools out there just to make it that much harder for you to get rid of it. The key is to wipe your system clean, bare metal, and then put your data back on there, and then put some simple measures in place where they can't ever come back. So remember the ransomware question when we get to single account or first account exposure, okay?
What about the,
Thank you for asking that question. Yes.
what about setting up the local DNS to the main name system? Can you do that through your router?
You can set up, so the question was, what about setting up local DNS? Can you do that through your router? The short answer is yes. There is high performance open source DNS that you can point your router to instead of your internet service provider. And that DNS is more reliable, tends to be more reliable and more available. But then you can also, there's two different methods you can use to set up local DNS. And that's going to be a topic of what we explore in the second module. We'll give you the means to do that, either by setting up a Raspberry Pi or by using and configuring a DNS server on campus. Then you just go home and you point your router to that here on campus. And it's your DNS server.
Or I think we did it last semester, setting it up for your virtual machine or virtual box.
Right, you can set it up in VirtualBox, right, on a virtual machine. Any other questions, comments? Good luck with your first attempt of the Module 1 assessment. Remember, you have to have it complete by 1 p.m. on Wednesday. All right.
Yep.
And then I'll also be sending some quick emails about your solution. Thanks for joining us today. That's all for now.